name is Edward J. Serafino. Edward J. Serafino.
Okay, today is November 12th, 2009. We're at Lake Michigan College in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Be talking to Edward J. Serafino. We'll be interviewing for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. My name is Terry Wainwright, lest we forget. Let's just start at the beginning. What's the year of your birth?
I was born January 16th of 1948.
And what branch of service were you in?
I was in the Marines.
And what was the highest rank that you...
I was in E4 when I got out.
Could you tell us a little bit about your family and your original background before?
Well, I was born and raised in a small town just west of Chicago. And I had 3 younger sisters, and my father worked construction, and my mother was a housewife.
And what high school did you go to?
I went to Morton West in Berwyn.
And when did you join the military?
I joined on the 120-day delayed program they had going, so I signed up in May, and I went in right out of high school in August.
And what made you choose the Marines?
Well, I wanted to be a draft dodger, so I joined the Marines. And I knew I was going to Vietnam, and I wanted the best training I could have, so I could come home.
And could you pick what occupation you had in the military?
Well, I was in 1833. It's an amphibious assault vehicle called an Amtrak. It's roughly 30 feet long, 10 feet high, 10 feet wide, and got a top speed of about 10 miles an hour on hard packed and about 2 miles an hour in the water. And they float.
Do you remember the first few days in the Marines? What was it like? And what was it like during basic training?
Well, I remember going downtown, and they put you in this big room and you stand around and wait. They took us on a bus, took us to O'Hare Airport. First time I was ever on a plane. Next stop was San Diego. We got off the plane, there was 2 drill instructors standing there, very nice gentlemen. Talked real nice to us until we got in the bus. We got in the bus, and the good times ended. Got to MCRD, stood on the yellow footprints, and went in there and got a haircut. All 20 of us walked through the barber shop in about 10 minutes. Then they walk you into different rooms. They give you a yellow t-shirt, pair of pants that almost fit, gym shoes and socks, skivvies. They march all 20 of us in the shower, come back, put all your civilian clothes in a box, put this other stuff on. They give you a blanket, sheets, pillowcase, and you finally go to bed about 4 in the morning. You get up at 6 and you start over again.
And what was boot camp like?
I was in pretty good shape when I went to boot camp because I played sports in high school, and it was rough. A lot of calisthenics, a lot of classrooms you go to, different things you learn, how to shoot a rifle, how to march, how to pay attention, how to just grow up.
How long did that last?
9 weeks. Then right out of boot camp, they give you your what you're going to do in the service. And then you go to ITR, which was 2 weeks, then you went home on leave for 20 days. Then I went back to California, learned what an Amtrak was, how to drive it, graduated from that in 30 days, went to staging, and then went to Vietnam.
And do you remember anything about your trip to Vietnam?
They took us on school buses to El Toro Air Force Base. We got there in the afternoon. We all went to the theater. The movie we went to see was Born Free. The next morning we got up. They had a civilian airplane, took us to Okinawa. Okinawa, we got our shots, we gave blood, left our uniforms there. Next stop was Da Nang. And then from Da Nang, you just went to your unit you were with.
What was your first impression of Vietnam? What did you think?
It was like a town that was 100 years old. You didn't see any street lights. There was no electricity where we were at. No ice. No anything.
And then you said you went from there further north. Where'd you go from there?
From Da Nang, I went to Dong Ha, where I was stationed with a 4-deuce mortar battery for a while, because they needed more people there than they did in Amtraks. From there, I went to Camp Carroll.
Stepping back a little bit, what was your job in Dong Ha?
In Dong Ha, it was in a 4-deuce mortar battery, where I worked with a supply person for 2 weeks, and then they had an outpost with, I believe it was about 10 4-deuce 4.2 mortars, and I ended up out there with them, and we just shoot the mortar at different areas. They'd have a shootout at night. I don't remember where the base was at. The only way in was by UE gunship. You'd go to the airport, they'd put you on a UE gunship, they'd take you in, they'd drop you off, and you just do that, and then you have to stand security at night during the monsoons, where it was so dark you couldn't see anything.
So how many people would be at this outpost?
There would be 3 of us in there. 2 would be awake and 1 would be sleeping.
How long did you stay there?
All night. That would last. You'd do that maybe 1 or 2 days a week. Different people would just rotate with you. Then if you're not doing that, then you'd be on gun watch all night. Or if a fire mission came in, you'd have to drop the rounds into the tube and shoot them.
And so you went to Camp Carroll. What'd you do there?
Well, they needed bodies up there, so they had us digging foxholes and bunkers and filling sandbags and moving sandbags. And we'd stand security in there at night also. That was the first time that we ever got hit with mortars and rockets. It's like a beautiful 4th of July coming in. You see nothing but red and blue and silver sparkling things going over your head at night.
Were there a lot of casualties?
There was quite a few up there, but not a lot.
You still haven't had a chance to use your specialty.
No, then from there we went to Quang Tri, where they got overran, so they put more Marines over there to stand security with the Arvins. And then finally I got into Amtraks. They took us down by an LST to Cocoa Beach, down by Phu Bai Way. From there we went 5 miles over the river to a cemetery between 3 villages. We stayed there for about a month and a half, just security.
What was it like there?
It was very boring, because you was just stand security, and we made a couple trips with the Amtraks. And on one of these trips, we were starting to get mortared. With the Amtraks not moving too fast, we had to call in for an airstrike, and they brought 2 jets in. They came in so fast and so low, dropping napalm, that nobody knew where they were coming from or how they got there. But when they go over the top of the Amtrak and you see those silver canisters come rolling out from the bottom, you know they're close. Then they come back on the radios and tell you, you better duck, here we come again. And they did.
You say you actually lived in a
We li-
active cemetery?
Yes. One Sunday every month, the Vietnamese they were allowed to come on our base and bring food for the dead. They would set up a little blanket on their grave and put vegetables and fruit on the grave so the person that passed could eat. And we always helped them out with that to make sure they ate good. From there, that platoon was the 3rd platoon. They were going back to Okinawa, and since I didn't have enough time to go back to Okinawa with them, they transferred me to the 4th platoon. From the 4th platoon, I went back to Calviette again. From there, we went to Cam Low, parked in another cemetery for a month. From there, we went to Cantillon. And we were up in Cantillon to haul supplies because it was so muddy up there, they couldn't get trucks to move. So we'd haul ammunition and water and food and take the water tank down to the creek and fill that up and bring that back every day. One time up in Cantillon, they had a bunch of infantrymen who got shot up real bad. They had 10 or 15 wounded, 10 or 15 dead. They called in for helicopters to medevac them out. They tried and they couldn't get them out because they were getting shot at. So we had to put 3 doctors, the corpsman, and a preacher inside the Amtrak and take them out and pick up the wounded and the dead. That was the day we're driving through the high elephant grass. I was driving. And you sit up in the front corner, and I looked down, and I ran over one of our bombs that didn't go off. For some reason, it did not blow again. A few minutes later, there was a Viet Cong laying in the grass with a gun. I seen him at the last minute and ran over him. I couldn't avoid him.
That was the only one there in that area that you knew of?
The only one that we knew of, yes. Then we went up there, found out where they were at. We started loading up the wounded and the dead, and I was helping them carry the wounded on stretchers back to the Amtrak. Went back to Cantillon, the helicopters there waiting for us, and they took them from us.
Were you under fire at that time, or was it quiet at that time?
We were under quite a lot of fire at that time.
During that whole period?
Yes. And months later, I was ready to come home. I was in Da Nang. This fellow Marine comes up and grabs my hand and shakes my hand. He says, "Thank you." I says, "I don't know you." He says, "Yes, you do." He says, "I was one of the wounded you carried." He says, "I told myself I'd never forget your face."
Now, you're telling me about the priest?
The priest that was in Cantillon with us, his name was Father Lyons. And we had our Amtraks parked right next to their makeshift hospital up there. And Father Lyons used to come into the Amtrak with us and talk with us at night, and he'd enjoy having his sea rations with us. And I was explaining to him that I was born and raised in a town in Illinois called Lyons. And he looks at me and he says, I used to be the preacher in the church in Riverside, which was 3 or 4 miles from my house.
And how long were you at Contan?
I believe I was there for about a month and a half. We were there for the Marine Corps birthday, and they did us a favor. They brought in real food for us that day. But the weather was so bad they couldn't get the helicopters in right away. All the food went bad, and we all got sick up there. So they had to fly in medication for us so we could still operate. We also spent Thanksgiving up there too.
What was Thanksgiving like?
They brought fresh food in for us again too. I don't think any of us ate it. Nothing against the cooks, but sea rations were much better.
Was that what the food was normally?
Yes, we carried a lot of sea rations. We did not have mess halls too often because we were out in different locations with the Amtraks.
What did you think of the food, the sea rations?
Yeah, you got your favorites. Your ham and lima beans were one of the best. You took the ham out very gently and you threw it as far as you could. Took the lima beans, you mixed them up with a little hot sauce, cheese and crackers, heated them up, they were good. The apricots you never ate.
So you got to become a real cook there, huh?
Yes, you do. You learn what's good and what's not.
Did you have much contact with the local people?
Most of the time, no, because anybody that came near the fence, near the wires, were free game to shoot. And when we were in the cemetery, that was times where people could come through us, and that was about it.
So were you pretty much stationary, or did you go out with your Amtrak and on any missions?
We would take the Amtraks out every third day. One day we would drive a patrol, next day we would walk the patrol, and the third day we'd work on the Amtraks. If we drove, we'd take the other people from our platoon, we'd drop them off at one side of the village. We would drive to the other side of the village and sit there and wait for them to come to us. And if anybody came out, we'd have to check their ID cards to see if they were north or south. If they didn't have an ID card, they were north, and we took them back to base.
How many would go on a mission?
There would be about 20 of us.
What's the capacity of the Amtrak?
I believe it would hold 30 on the inside, but you never rode on the inside, you always rode on the top. Because on the bottom of the Amtrak was all the fuel, and it held almost 400 gallons of fuel, of gas. So if you hit a bomb, it would just explode and burn everything up inside.
How safe was it when you were in the Amtrak then?
One 7.62 round would go through the side of it. They weren't that safe.
Did one ever do that?
We had quite a few that sunk and burned and got blown up by different mines and bombs. And if you were lucky, if you hit a small bomb, you would just blow the track off of it.
So what kind of weapons did the Amtrak have? What did
It
you
would
have to fight back?
We had one 30 caliber machine gun that would be mounted on the front. It had a 3-man crew. You had a driver, a machine gunner, and a crew chief.
So where'd you go after Contian?
Cantillon, we went back to Calviette for the first of the year, January of '68, and then we went aboard a ship. We were part of a BLT, Battalion Landing Troop. They loaded us up on the Cleveland, which was an LPD. We were supposed to take the Amtraks and just swim them out to the ship, but the waves were so high they had to bring mike boats in. They put the Amtrak on the boat, took that out to the ship, unloaded it, came back. And I was a crew chief of 4-0, so that meant I was the first one off the ship, the last one on. We finally got on the ship, got the Amtrak tied down with the dogs. This officer comes up to me and says, "How'd you like the Navy food?" I says, "I don't know, sir." I says, "We just got on here and we're ready to go back to the Amtrak, have some more sea rations for supper." He says, "No, you're not." Took us to officer's mess and fed us that night. That was the first time in months that we had milk. That was cold and not powdered. Then from there we went to the Philippine Islands. We were supposed to be there for a month with the Battalion Landing Troop, and that ended up to be about 4 or 5 days. Then they had us load back up and go back and made a landing in Calviette when the TET started. We stayed on the beach for another couple weeks. The ship came in. My lieutenant knew I was getting short, so he had me go back on the ship to go down to Da Nang to go back home.
You say you were in country in early '68. Were you there during TET?
Just the start of it.
Just started. What was that like?
There was a lot more mortars and rockets that came into our base, but
Just more active then.
yes. And we always listened to Hanoi Anna. She said, "I will have New Year's dinner in your mess hall." She didn't.
And what other kind of entertainment did you have?
I seen one USO show. Now, the night before I was ready to leave from Da Nang, that was the USO show we seen. We were so far north, Bob Hope wouldn't even send us a card. We didn't have any up there. We didn't have weekends. It was just another day to work.
You mentioned about Bob Hope.
When I got out of the service, I went back to the nightclub I used to work at in my small town. I was in there working one night, and Bob Hope and a couple of his friends walked in there. The waiter knew I was back from Vietnam. He told Bob Hope. Bob Hope called me over by him to say hello. He asked me how great his shows were. I told him, "I don't know. You wouldn't even send us a card." He shook my hand and laughed.
Any other things that was memorable? Any unusual happenings or anything while you're there that comes to mind?
Well, the worst thing that happened to me when I left Vietnam, I was in one of our local watering holes in my hometown, and the police were looking for me that night. So when I went back home. I went to the police station. They informed me that my driver got killed right after I left Nam. And his parents wanted me to come up and see him. They were up in Primera, Wisconsin. His name was Chuck Dool.
What was the best experience you had in regards to Vietnam and your military service?
When we left the Philippine Islands with the Amtraks, we had them, the ship was parked out maybe a quarter mile in the bay, and we had to take our Amtraks and swim them out to the ship. And if anybody went to the Philippine Islands, especially Subic Bay, they know what's there. There's a lot of taverns and a lot of loose women. And we wanted to see who could buy the most women's skivvies to hang on the antennas. We went back to the ship. That was great. One of the colonels or general from Subic Bay wanted to have his wife and daughters watch the Amtraks go back to the ship. He did not care for our flags that were flying off the antennas. We ended up with no liberty for 30 days off the ship.
While you're in Vietnam, how'd you keep in touch with your family back home?
We used to just write letters. And what was nice about Vietnam, you never had stamps. We used to just write across the top where the stamp would go, free. And that was, and being away from our base most of the time, sometimes it would take a month before we got a letter. Then you get a whole stack of them.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
No, not that I could think of.
Tell me about your trip home from Vietnam. What was it like? And what kind of experience did you have?
We went back to back to Okinawa. We ended up landing there. Well, first when we were aboard the ship, the Cleveland, they got my records, and then they says, okay, we're not going to Da Nang. So I flew on a small helicopter from the Cleveland to the Iwo Jima. And before we got on, you're standing there with an envelope with your papers in it. And they tell you, if you lose your papers, you're not going home. So you're sitting on this airplane, this helicopter, with no doors on it, and they fly you from one ship to the other. Then we went on to Iwo Jima. From that, they went down to Da Nang. They took all of our paperwork and put it on a small boat, and they says, okay, climb down the rope ladder to the other boat. And they're going up and down. And when they say jump, jump. Then we got into Da Nang. They said, your plane is not leaving for a day and a half. That was the night we seen the USO show. They played the Marine Corps hymn, and everybody stood up. Went back to the airport, sat in wooden benches, left Da Nang. Got to Okinawa. We were there for 6 hours. Got our sea bags, got on a civilian plane, went back to El Toro. Landed in El Toro. We had a big party waiting for us. Maybe 5 people. Walked into this building, sat down. They signed our orders, and they said, if you go to the airport, be careful, stay in groups. We piled in a cab, went to the airport, and we stayed in a group, marching people, walking the rest of us to different gates. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was by myself. Everybody else was gone. Went to the washroom. Next thing I know, 2 guys are trying to push me through the wall. And all of a sudden, they were gone. 2 guys walked in and started thumping on those 2. And I said, could I stay and help? They said, no, get out. So they threw me out of the washroom. I seen these guys half hour later. They were both in the Navy. That was their job, to stay at the airport and protect military people.
Then where'd you go from there?
From there, I went back to Chicago. Stayed home for 30 days, for 35 days, because I had to get a 5-day extension to go to my driver's funeral. His parents wanted me to be a pallbearer in uniform, which I did. Came home, drove out to California, and I was stationed working in the brig in Camp Pendleton. And then from there, I was discharged out of there and went back home.
After leaving the military, did you keep in touch with the guys?
No, I didn't, except we had a reunion 11 years ago in a big town called Newtown, North Dakota. They have one casino there. It's 4 Bears. One of the Marines that were in our platoon, he was from that tribe. And he wanted to have a reunion at the casino. And he said, he was talking to some of us, and he says, when we come home from the war, we meet at this arena. There's a big hall there, and they go there, and everybody from the village and the tribe, they come back and they welcome you home. He said sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days before all the food and booze are gone. And he says, so that was it. So he wanted to have the reunion there. So we had the reunion there. We had a good time. That was the same weekend they had a powwow. There had to be over 1,000 Indians there. And he had it arranged so the 30 of us would carry the colors in for opening ceremony. So I tried to get at the end of the line, which I did. So we carried the colors in and set them up, and as we're marching in, the Indians are coming in behind us in full dress. And we made a big circle, and they were still coming in. So we get out there and all set up, and he gets up there and does his prayers and everything, and he says, when we were aboard ship, we were talking, what happens when these people come home? The bartender might buy him a drink if you're lucky. He says, you will be walking home today. So they excused all the Indians. He says, okay, welcome them home. They start off by having all the old women come up to you. They give you a hug and a kiss and a squeeze, and say a couple nice words to you, and then you get the ones that come up and give you a hug and a kiss and a squeeze and say, "I'm happy you made it home. I wish my son or husband would have made it home too." Now you have 30 Marines up there with tears running down. And everybody came up and welcomed you home. The Indians in full dress, the kids, everybody. That's one thing I'll never forget.
So, do you use the GI Bill at all, or?
After a few months after I got out of service, I went to work for the telephone company, and I used my GI Bill for on-the-job training, which wasn't too much, but it helped out back then.
So what kind of impact do you think being in the Marines made on your life?
I believe they should activate the draft and have everybody join the service. We were sitting in a restaurant one night, one Sunday morning, me and my wife, on two busy streets. The restaurant was packed. I seen this young girl sitting in a car. This guy jumped off the sidewalk, tried to get in her car, and she was smart enough to lock her doors, and then he went and sat on her hood so she couldn't move. Nobody from the restaurant would do anything about it. I just walked out and asked him very nicely to leave. And he did. I walked back in the restaurant. 5 or 6 people came up to me and asked me what I said to him. I said, if you wanted to know, you would have walked out too. Being in the military, you kind of look out for other people. That's why I feel I did it.
Anything else you'd like to say?
This is a lot harder than you think it is, being on this side of the chair. And I thank you very much. You did a great job.
Anything else?
All right, very good.